let's kick off one of the topics that we wanted to discuss on a serious note, and that is a mare cap. And whether it's the 140 mares that the Jockey Club had originally implemented or tried to implement, or 200 mares, it almost doesn't matter what the number is. It's just whether or not you truly believe that a cap would, in essence, change the fragility of horses and make them sounder or make them better. Or are there other alternatives out there other than just, kind of artificially capping and changing the supply and demand system that we currently have? Please expound.
I'll first say that this is not a topic on which I have great expertise. Yes, I've been in the game a long time and involved in some respects with the breeding aspect of the game, and I've followed it with great interest. And some of what I write about the problems, especially the remarkable decline in durability that's occurred over the last 50 years of the average thoroughbred, is something that I'm very interested in. The mare cap itself and the genetic aspect of the related questions is not something that I have great expertise in. And incidentally, when I engaged early on with Mike Rapoli, who obviously does have a fair amount of experience as a breeder at this point, I asked him to explain, or have someone involved with his NTA organization to explain why a cap should be needed in order to strengthen the breed, approximately what number would be needed in order to affect the desired change, and how was that number going to be calculated, and so on. So I asked him a few questions. And then I also did a bit of research on my own, because he did not respond to those questions that I asked. And so the first thing that I came across, which I think is salient and important, is that in January of 2020, there was an extensive study that was published. It was entitled Genomic Inbreeding Trends, Influential Sire Lines, and Selection in the Global Thoroughbred Horse Population. Now, of course, I don't want to make people run away from their computers thinking that I'm going to spend a half an hour digging into all the numbers that underpin a study like this. And in fact, I don't understand many of the numbers that are the foundation of a study like this.
You and me both.
It's a serious, yeah, both, yeah. It's a serious study, and what I would like to do, if you'll indulge me, is I'd like to just highlight a few of the points that are made by the authors of the study, because they at least begin to address some of the questions that I asked Mike Rapoli, and that I think anyone who has an interest in this issue would want to be, as well educated on as possible. So the first is that this is apparently the most comprehensive genetic analysis that's ever been performed on the thoroughbred racing population. They used a total of 10,118 thoroughbreds that were obviously genetically scanned and filed in the computer database. Now, this was not a study that was done only on American horses. In fact, it included horses from Europe, the Middle East, Australia, New Zealand, North America, of course, South Africa, and Japan. So it's a pretty wide selection of horses. Mm-hmm. But I think that makes it probably more robust and interesting than just focusing on one country. And one of the things they say at the beginning of the study, the authors, is, I'm quoting, while inbreeding depression generally negatively impacts health and fertility through the accumulation of deleterious alleles, the quote tipping point at which there is an irreversible accumulation of unfavorable mutations is not currently known.
Mhm.
I thought that was very interesting
Mhm.
because it's suggesting that as the industry's breeding practices continue their trajectory in the direction of compression of genetic material, fewer and fewer outcrosses and greater appearances of a smaller number of stallions, it means that we don't really know at what point or the scientists don't really know, when it's going to be a really big problem. So that's number one. And now I'm going to jump all the way to the conclusion and make a few other highlight points. They say, we report here a highly significant increase in inbreeding in the global thoroughbred population during the last 5 decades, which is unlikely to be halted due to the current breeding practices. So once again, we're talking about, we're on a slippery slope and we don't know at what point, there could be a crash, so to speak. Then they go on to say that they suggest that the way to perhaps arrest this problematic trajectory and turn it around would be to do widespread genetic testing and identify the primary genetic sources that the sires and sire lines that are becoming increasingly compressed, and introduce outcrosses, try to reduce that by looking at the genetics. Not just, it'd be very tempting for all of us to say, oh yeah, we know that there's a lot of Northern Dancer and Raise a Native and this and that, but they're talking about doing it in a scientific way, right? And at the end, they say, quote, given the limited diversity in current thoroughbred pedigrees, genomics-based measuring high-density genome-wide SNP information on a large reference population are likely to offer the best opportunity to slow and reverse the potential effects of inbreeding. So, there is, I would say, clear evidence based on this study that confirms what those of us who hadn't been thinking about it in such scientific terms have suspected, and that is that there's been a real compression of the pedigrees of the influences in the game, and that it is potentially a big problem. And I learned from that study that even the scientists don't know at what point exactly the real problems of inbreeding excessively begin to rear their ugly heads. So I'll start with that and kick it back to you guys.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to get your take on, the Jockey Club, the whole genesis of this discussion was the Jockey Club proposing the 140 mare cap and then them getting, getting sued by 3 major stallion farms and eventually being struck down. And, I'm not a legal expert. I can't really say whether or not that was, infringing on the free market and the freedom of economics and the principles that have run the stallion business for a really long time in America. But it's just one of those things where I think a lot of people say the right things in racing, that where the gene pool is getting restricted, horses are becoming less sound, horses aren't racing enough. And then when it comes down to the bottom line, there's really no oomph behind the words. And just, it was a predictable consequence of the Jockey Club trying to basically dictate how many mares every stallion could breed. But is there any way out of that? Is there any possible way that you think that the blue bloods and the bigwigs in this sport will agree, maybe not to 140 mare cap, but come together and agree that something needs to be drastically done and altered to fix this problem long term?
Yeah, unfortunately, Joe, I am on record for quite some time as being a skeptic of the likelihood of that happening. And I'm not going to spend any time delving into it in depth, but I'm going to again mention that there is a very close connection between how the business of the American thoroughbred racing industry has developed over the last 20 or 30 years in particular, and how business has been done, more broadly speaking, in the U.S. over the last 20 or 30 years. And I think that what we see are connections or analogies that are really fairly taught in some ways. And I think that for the same reason that the biggest and wealthiest companies in the U.S. have come to wield so much power, when you have an organization like Coolmore, they wield so much power. Ireland obviously, but even in the U.S. with what was originally just an outpost in Ashford Stud, they now wield a tremendous amount of power. Now, I can go more deeply into this, because the next set of points that I wanted to focus on is based on a fairly simple and straightforward bit of research that I did into all of the current American stallions that covered or were that covered 180 or more mares last year in 2023. Yes, the Jockey Club chose 140 as their cap. I'm not precisely sure why that was. I do believe that they had good reason to do it, not only based on the global study that I just excerpted a few quotes from, but because it's clear that there has been a tremendous compression of stallions that are dominating or coming to dominate the gene pool in the U.S. And I'll give a couple of related set of stats. So, and this is also what the Jockey Club said at the time that they attempted to impose the 140 mare cap. They pointed out that in 2010, there were 24 North American stallions that bred books in excess of 140 mares. And that was 24 out of a total of 3,865 stallions. 9 years later, there were 43, so almost a doubling of the number of stallions that were covering 140 or breeding 140 or more mares. And the population of stallions had been cut in half. So it was a huge jump. And there's the same sort of situation with mares. In 2007, there were 5,894 mares, which was 9.5% of all mares, that were bred by stallions that covered 140 mares or more. By 2019, there were 7,415 mares, or 27%, almost a tripling of all mares bred were covered by stallions with books of more than 140. And those numbers, that was 2019. So, 5 years ago, those numbers are presumably worse today. So, the numbers were certainly there for the Jockey Club to be concerned. And I'm going to kick it back to you guys, but when you come back to me, though, I'm welcome to answer any questions. I do want to go over this list of 180 plus mare covered stallions, because there are some interesting breakdowns that I think you'll enjoy.